One cold winter day, you arrive and look at the hive. Nothing. No flight. No movement. It's as if the hive is just sitting there, as if it were alive. But in reality, behind those wooden walls, thousands of bees are currently carrying out one of life's and complex collective operations. What we perceive as nothingness is actually the very essence of intense activity. While we continue to warm ourselves in our homes, those little bees in your garden will be generating heat by convulsing against sub-zero temperatures. Some will vibrate to keep the inside of the hive afloat, while others will use the energy right in the middle in a measured way. Welcome back to Bees Around Us. Subscribe before you leave, because in each video, we continue to unveil another layer of that seemingly ordinary bee in your garden. Stay until the end of the video, because the last topic I will discuss is the unique mechanism by which bees teach themselves how to survive in the cold through a general but surprising collective intelligence. So, without further ado, let's begin with our first point. 1. They close the door. This might be surprising, but the truth is that towards the end of October, the temperature starts to drop by a factor of 15. Therefore, worker bees narrow the entrance to their hives. But this decision doesn't happen overnight. Days before, when the decrease in temperature is felt, the bees begin to enter the hive less frequently. That is, nectar-gathering trips shorten, then become less frequent, and finally stop completely. The slowdown in external activity is actually a sign that the process inside, which we call propolising, is underway. Propolis is a sticky substance that bees collect from tree resins, processed with beeswax and enzymes. Bees apply propolis to the entrances of the hive and to the joints where the wood cracks. They bite and knead it, forming top layers. Since a worker bee can carry very little, this requires the bees to work for days on end. And if you ask the question, why don't they close the door completely? Because the hive also needs to breathe. The thousands of bees inside will generate heat, consume honey, and produce moisture in the process. If the entrance were completely closed, they would trap this moisture inside. The moisture would drip and spoil the honey in its raw state. A narrow but open entrance allows for air circulation and, in mild winter conditions, allows the bees to move outside and perform cleaning operations. The next time you inspect your hive, I want you to take a close look at your entrance. The dark-colored, filling or sticky stuffing system along the edge is propolis. This is not a foreign substance. It is a structure that is placed there in the way the bees hide. Do not attempt to clean the entrance yourself, because that stuffing is already there for them. 2. They cluster. When the air temperature drops sufficiently, that is, when the temperature exceeds the critical limit, the bees stop living alone and all begin to gather together on the honeycomb. At the top of each one, they intertwine and form dense clusters. So this cluster, almost the size of a football, sometimes contains 10,000, and sometimes even 15,000 to 20,000 living beings filling a single unit of heat. Of course, there is constant movement within this cluster. Those on the outside are exposed to the cold, while those on the inside are warmer. Therefore, the bees move at regular intervals. Those in the outer layer move inwards, and those on the inside shift towards the appropriately classified areas. None can constantly remain in the coldest place, and none can maintain the warmth indefinitely. So, the clusters work like a shared life machine. There is also a logic that the queen bee stands right in the center of the cluster. That is the warmest spot, and this is certainly not a coincidence. The future of the colony depends on her, and the entire heat economy of the cluster is organized around her. The bees can move while simultaneously warming the queen bee and clustering. They never stand still. They continue to move along the honeycomb. Because the honey at one point runs out, the cluster naturally needs to shift to the next storage honeycomb. This shift is quite slow, perhaps taking weeks. But even if there's a full honeycomb nearby, it can still spill out if it's clustered together in the middle of the field. Beekeepers describe it as one of the most common wintering habits of a colony. So, frequently opening the hive in a cold winter and breaking up the cluster is dangerous. Recooling a cluster once it's broken up requires a great deal of effort and energy in cold weather. The best intervention is often no intervention at all. 3. They can generate heat with muscle vibrations. Naturally, if the cluster cools down, the bees don't wait. They vibrate their muscles without opening their wings. This difference is important. They don't move their wings to fly. They only contract and relax their chest muscles, like a heater. Doing this, and also purifying the internal temperature of the cluster, rapidly increases. Of course, studies show that the internal cooling of the winter colony can be maintained between 30 and 35 degrees, even if the outside temperature drops to -20 degrees. -20 outside, 35 inside, a difference of 55 degrees. On a winter night, the wooden wall of the hive is the only thing separating these two worlds. And what keeps it warm is not electricity, no fuel, just eyebrows. Now, the critical point in this matter is that this heat production comes at a cost. Bees expend energy to shiver, those who consume honey for energy. The more severe the cold, the more the colony shivers, the more honey it burns. The difference between a mild winter and a harsh winter is not just a matter of comfort for the hive. It's a matter of how sooner the honey reserve will be depleted. As you can see, the question is, not every bee in the colony changes at the same time. Those inside shiver less, those outside shiver more. The load sharing is arranged in this way. The outer layer acts as both the primary heat producer and meets the moisture needs. The insides rest, then after a while they switch places. It's their turn. As many of us might guess, in harsh winters, there may be no honey left in the hive by spring. This is not negligence. It becomes abundant as fuel throughout the summer. Therefore, providing early support to a weak colony entering spring can be critical. 4. Winter feeding is calculated. First of all, I would like to say this. Bees store honey before winter. This is not a coincidence. It is a precisely calculated accumulation. According to bee scientists' estimates, a hive can consume approximately 5 to 20 kilograms of honey to survive the winter. Let's make this concrete. 1 liter of honey is approximately 1 kilogram. 7 kilograms of honey means a reserve that completely fills a medium-sized backpack, obtained from the mixture of nectar and water that the foraging bee collects and digests over weeks. Of course, normally, bees do not exit during winter. They consume the honey stores on the comb. But this consumption is not regular. As they cluster along the comb, the cells empty, and they move on to the next one. The problem is, this progression is only in one direction. The cluster cannot go back. If clustering progresses very slowly during a cold period, or if it gets stuck in an expected spot, it will be depleted before reaching the full honeycomb a few centimeters away. Bee scientists describe this as starvation when food is nearby, and say it is one of the most common causes of winter losses. Ultimately, it's not just fuel, but also a water source. Bees don't eat snow in winter, nor do they carry water from outside. The moisture in the honey is their only reliable liquid. Therefore, the moisture content in winter honey storage is also critical. Very dry honey causes dehydration in bees. In fact, leaving sufficient honey reserves in the hive in the fall is the most fundamental intervention in winter. If too much honey has been taken and the hive feels light, Early inspection is necessary without delay. The lighter the hive, the greater the danger. 5. The queen bee makes the spring decision. Here I would especially like to say that. Now we come to the biggest measure. All that clustering, all that heat production, all that honey consumption is actually for one thing: the survival of the queen bee and the colony being ready for flowering. There is a fact that the next spring for the hive directly depends on the queen bee surviving the winter. During winter, the queen bee slows down or completely stops laying eggs. The colony shrinks. Older worker bees leave one by one, and there are no new bees. The hive becomes quieter. This isn't just a one-off, it's a purposeful downsizing. Fewer bees mean less heat requirement and less honey consumption. The hive is optimizing itself for winter. Because consider this: from the end of January, starting in February, there's a change. Bee scientists say this increases with the increase in daylight. Even a short change in daylight length triggers a signal in the hive. The queen bee starts laying eggs again. You might be outside. There might be snow, no flowers, no nectar. But it's about activating the queen bee. Of course, there's also this. Why is this early start so important? It takes about 3 weeks for a worker bee to develop from an egg to a mature bee. If the queen bee doesn't soften up at the beginning of February, when the first flowers open in mid-March, there won't be any young, strong worker bees in the hive. Missing that window can be devastating for the hive. Therefore, the queen bee starts while the weather is still cold. The risk is taken, but the timing is perfect. In addition, that's the secret of that spring explosion. In April, the hive looks just as full and overflowing. Actually, this explosion was happening in February. In your garden, inside that motionless hive, that preparation may be going on right now. Let's get back to our question. What do bees do when the cold sets in? They close the door. They build a cluster. They twitch their eyebrows. They calculate the honey. And they're already planning their due dates. As you can imagine, when you're in your garden, you haven't seen anything in front of you. But now it's known that inside, there are thousands of parts. It's minus 10 degrees outside, and you're 35. The queen bee, the most general queen bee in the colony, is the carrier of life in the hive. And at the end of February, when there's nothing there, that hive will burst open. It will stay in your garden. You've lived next to it for years. It's there now. So, have you ever approached your hive in winter? Put your ear to it? Did you hear a slight buzzing sound from inside? Write it down below. I'm curious. See you in the next video.